Happy holidays from the Signal Watch podcast. The world is full of movies about Christmas and the Yuletide season. But some movies just happen to take place at Christmas for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Hi, I'm your host, Ryan Steens. This holiday season, join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine movies that are kinda, sorta holiday adjacent, more than an actual Christmas movie. It's not exactly Christmas movies, but you can't say they don't occur during Christmas, so you get it. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work.
My name is Marlowe, Philip Marlowe. Occupation, private detective. You know, somebody says, follow that guy. So I follow him. Somebody says, find that female. So I find her. But some cases, like this one, kind of creep up on you on their hands and knees. And the first thing you know, you're in it up to your neck. Right now, you're reading in your newspapers and hearing over your radios about a murder. They call it The Case of the Lady in the Lake. It's a good title. It fits. What you've read and what you've heard is one thing. The real thing is something else. There's only one guy who knows that. I know it.
Merry Christmas and welcome to the Signal Watch. I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is...
Jamie Steens. Happy holidays.
And we're continuing on our series of covering Christmas-adjacent movies.
Yes.
And what that means is these movies take place at Christmas, but the plots don't necessarily hinge on it being Christmas. So you get the idea.
I think this one nails that.
Good.
This is Ryan's choice, by the way. This is Ryan's featured
This may be the first
choice.
Movie we have done in almost 80 episodes that was specifically just my choice.
I think so. Yeah, this is your show.
Yeah.
I'm just here for the ride along.
Right. So what we're covering is a 1946-47 movie called Lady in the Lake. And it's based on a Raymond Chandler novel of the same name.
Can I ask you, have you read the book?
Yes.
I figured you had. I just wanted to make sure, because I have some questions.
Sure.
Later. Much later.
I'm sure there's a lot of questions. Everyone's kind of familiar with the notion of Philip Marlowe as the detective. We kind of have two modes of detectives that we think of in kind of popular noir fiction, and that's Sam Spade, who's in The Maltese Falcon by Dashiell Hammett, and then we have Philip Marlowe. And there's a million iterations from there, like Mike Hammer, Mike Shane, like you can just kind of go on and on. The Continental Op is the other Dashiell Hammett detective that they've adapted somewhat here and there. But this is Philip Marlowe, and Philip Marlowe has been portrayed. We covered The Long Goodbye, me and Simon did a while back, and that was a kind of 1970s adaptation.
I watched that with you. Yeah, I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and they were really patting themselves on the back about how hip and modern they were. But I do like The Long Goodbye as a movie. I hadn't actually read the novel, but I have read the novel of this, and I have read the novel of The Long Goodbye, and highly recommend it. But Lady in the Lake is probably most famous for being not the first movie that shot from a first-person perspective, but it's the first movie that shot entirely from a first-person perspective.
Yeah, the first time, this is the first time I've seen it all the way through. You showed me the very beginning at one point because you sat me down and said, you have to watch at least 10, 15 minutes of this movie because it is bananas. And it really is like disorienting, almost, is the best word I can come up with. And then I saw it, you were watching it another time, so I watched a little bit of it then. But this is the first time I've seen it all the way through. And it takes a good, I would say 30 minutes to get used to the POV.
Yeah.
In this movie.
Which is funny because the other movie that had preceded this, that had done it, Dark Passage, I believe is the name of it. And it's a Humphrey Bogart, Lauren Bacall movie. And they use it very, very differently for it's like the first third of the movie. And in Dark Passage, essentially, Bogart is a guy who's escaped San Quentin. I just said San Quentin. And he's on the run, and he gets plastic surgery a third of the way through to change his features. And then they cut to a more standard filming where you can see Bogart. But they were like, well, we're not going to like put Bogart in prosthetics or anything. So
Sure.
And it's also used differently in the this has very long takes. Mm-hmm. And Dark Passage kind of does, but they start off like in the hills outside of San Quentin and out on the other side of the bay in San Francisco, in like the hills, and then they're kind of moving from place to place to place. Where this one is like almost like a play, like little playettes of like, here's an 8-minute scene, here's an 8-minute scene.
It almost felt to me like if it had been much, much earlier in film history, I would have said this is kind of a clunky adaptation of, this is what someone thinks a book adaptation to a movie should be. Mm-hmm. It almost feels like that, if that makes any sense. Like,
well, that was, if you look at Wikipedia, what Robert Montgomery, who was an actor, and this was his first directing gig. Mm-hmm. Can you believe that someone decided this is how they were going to come out of the gate as a director? But that was exactly what he was thinking. Is the Marlowe books are all first-person POV, and he's like, let's put people right in his shoes.
I can understand like the ideas that led to this, because it's like, this is a detective story. There are a lot of detective movies where you're hearing their POV like constantly throughout the whole thing.
Right.
So I can understand why he maybe thought that this would work. And Raymond Chandler, is that the writer, the author,
right.
He wanted no credit for this movie when he heard that that's what the way they were doing it.
So I like this movie. I love the book, and they're very different in many, many ways. One of the things that I think you really lose, and I've read almost all Chandler's novels, I think, at this point. Not all of his novellas, and certainly none of his short stories at this point. So if anyone's looking to gift me something for Christmas, I'd love a Raymond Chandler short story collection. But Philip Marlowe was kind of his primary figure in the kind of post-short story era. And The Big Sleep was Philip Marlowe. And then, so it's been portrayed by Bogart. I really like Dick Powell as he's kind of in my head exactly what Philip Marlowe is.
When you're reading the books, is that who you picture?
And it's because of the first time I watched and really thought about who Philip Marlowe was, and I'd read a book. I watched the Dick Powell movie, and then ever since in my head it's been Dick Powell. Hang on, Aaron's going by in his chopper.
Bye, Aaron.
Bye, Aaron. So, anyway, but yeah, so Dick Powell has been in my head who Marlowe is.
I think for me it's Bogart because, I mean, well, it's not like I've read the books, but that's who I always think of because he's the one that I've seen.
Sure. But because he's also played Sam Spade and
right,
you know, all these other characters, it's like, I always think of Bogart as kind of being this singular thing, or Sam Spade.
Yeah.
Or the character from High Sierra, or Treasure of the Sierra Madre. But, Chandler didn't want anything to do with this because he'd written a 195-page screenplay initially, which, you know, would make this like well over a 3-hour movie at that point. So they trimmed that down and turned it into this.
It really felt like this was made on a shoestring budget, almost. I mean, there's nothing wrong with how it was done, but there's a big chunk that could have been done in the middle of the movie, I believe, that they just go back to. There are 3 sections which he's just talking to the camera.
Right.
And then he's behind the camera the rest of the way.
Yeah.
It's at the very beginning, in the middle the little part in the middle, and then at the very end. In the middle, he says, well, I went up to the lake and I interviewed these people. You know, he just basically tells you what he did. And they could have, you know, done another location where, you know, they follow him up there.
I am so pleased you called that out. Yeah, I mean, that's one of the major differences between, I mean, there's a lot of difference between the novel and the movie. But a lot of the action in the novel takes place at the frickin' lake.
Yeah, it's called Lady in the Lake, and it's vaguely referred to here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't believe they chose that was where they were going to skip over everything. But I think back then film cameras were, the size of a Volkswagen, and they were really hard to manipulate and move around. So you'll see like the old studio things with the giant cranes, and there was a reason you shot everything on a sound stage. You didn't necessarily go out unless you were shooting on 16, and this is MGM. They're not shooting anything on 16. So yeah, they wanted full MGM production on this, and to do that, they didn't, I guess, feel like they could take, even though they created a dolly for this so they could get the first-person POV and move the camera around, and Montgomery apparently sat below the lens so people would have a voice to talk to while they were imagining the eye of the lens was his face. I'm holding up my hand as if it's the lens.
That was one of the things that didn't work for me because it felt, as creative as it was, and honestly, I thought the actors did a fantastic job, especially Audrey Totter. She was basically the star of this movie, let's be honest.
Oh, we're going to talk about that.
I know. It's written down in my notes here. It almost felt like you were watching, like when you watch people's audition tapes, and you hear the other person reading lines to them from off camera. It's exactly what this felt like to me.
That's really interesting. Okay, yeah. I was thinking, I wonder how a modern audience would feel about this, because to me it now feels like a video game.
Yeah,
like
that too.
Like when you go into like Grand Theft Auto or something. I haven't played a video game in years, but when you're playing like Grand Theft Auto or something, and you have those cut scenes, and the characters always look right at the character. That's how it felt. Was like you kind
of expected. They're not moving as much as the CG characters bouncing around. You can see Audrey Totter doing that. Yeah, that's interesting. I never would have thought of that because I'm not really a video game player. That wouldn't have come up. But yes.
Oh, this is probably the 6th time I've watched this movie, and I'd never thought of that until last night when we were watching it. I'm like, what else would you have something like this in? And I was like, well, yeah, this is how they do.
This is how they do auditions, and that's how they do video games. That's absolutely true, yeah.
Yeah, and so one of the things I also find really weird about it, and why I think the audience would have found it unnerving, is the direction Montgomery gave was be looking at the camera all the time.
I'm so glad you said that, because that was another thing I was going to bring up. Even people leaving, he's tracking them, he's looking at them leaving the room. They're looking at him the entire time. Which is creepy. I understand that maybe the secretary, she's interested, so she's kind of flirting. But that's not just her. There's literally everyone that he's looking at. They're looking at the camera all the time. And that's not natural.
No. We're being really self-conscious, I think, about it right now, looking at each other. But I think, in the real world, when you're talking to someone, or even when you're acting, people look at other things. Making eye contact is a highly aggressive thing to do. It's also a highly personal thing to do. You're getting in someone's space by making eye contact. So I was listening a little bit to the commentary on the other track. I didn't make it all the way through because I got tired and went to bed. But they were talking about how the audience was kind of walking out of this movie because they were like, they kept saying, it's because, they felt it was weird, and where's Robert Montgomery? We're only hearing him. We paid to see a Robert Montgomery movie. I'm like, yeah, but part of why it's so weird is you're getting stared down by everyone who comes up on screen.
Yeah. And as much as I love Audrey Totter in this movie, she does, there are moments where she's giving, the eyes. And it's almost silly.
Oh, it's campy.
Yeah.
There's definitely moments that play a little camp, certainly, in this movie.
You have to wonder, was it a direction that he made because, people act weird around detectives? And that could maybe be the reason they're staring at him like that, but I don't know.
I think he was a first-time director.
And this is an unusual style too. I think he called it subjective camera.
Right, and I think they were afraid of what it looked like if they weren't looking directly at the camera.
Okay.
And I don't know. It makes me want to go and watch other movies from around 46 to see, are the actors being told by directors to constantly look at each other when they're acting, or are they looking elsewhere?
now the next time we watch a movie from that era, I'm definitely going to be looking at that.
Yeah, because I think about like Brando and like more naturalistic acting that shows up about 5-6 years later, and like on the waterfront he's not looking at anybody. He's looking at his hands. He's looking at the ground. He's looking.
You know, I don't think I've ever seen On the Waterfront. Write it down.
I hadn't seen it till a few years ago, but it's phenomenal. So anyway, another film recommendation for you folks. But yeah, so I mean, I think about kind of like what the changes were as this other more naturalistic, and I also think about like John Garfield, who his characters were often very intense, and he looked at people. But I think if you watch his films, he isn't always looking directly at people when he's giving monologues and things like that.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, you just don't do that. I mean.
But Montgomery, he was a very popular film star at this time. It'd be a little bit like if, I don't want to say Harrison Ford, because no one's ever been bigger than Harrison Ford, but someone who was like
Tom Cruise.
Tom Cruise decided suddenly to become a director, and he's great on camera, all that. But yeah, directing's and people say later in his other films that he directed, he was so good at creating a set where actors felt comfortable, because he was an actor himself. He knew how to do it. People loved working on the very few movies he made, and I'm sure that was true too here, working with like Audrey Totter, who is apparently just cool as hell anyway. So I imagine she was like, oh yeah, I'm having fun doing this,
Yeah. Well, this
plus
movie
she was playing the kind of character she loved to play.
This movie did well on its opening weekend. It did really well. So people maybe showed up for it and then thought it was weird, but they got the money out of it. So I think it made the equivalent of like $6 million for which, it's not.
That's really big. Yeah. So, it was also it'd be like being based on a John Grisham novel back in the 90s.
Yeah.
Like it was
Pelican Brief or
the like. Yeah. So people were like, oh, the latest Chandler, because it was only like, I think 4 years old at this point, that the novel.
The book was?
Yeah. So, yeah, it was like a fairly recent novel is being adapted. Let's go see the movie adaptation of it. But yeah, so let's talk a little bit about the plot so people know.
Sure. I'm going to let you take the reins on this, because I'm going to need a second viewing to be able to keep everything in line. Go ahead.
So people complain about The Big Sleep, or it is a laugh anyway, of no one can tell you what The Big Sleep is about, which I find a little absurd. You can figure out what The Big Sleep is about if you pay attention, if you've read the novel, those sorts of things. It isn't always clear exactly what happened to which person when people show up dead, and it's like, well, who killed that person, and it's left a little ambiguous. So that doesn't mean you can't follow the plot of The Big Sleep. And I think Lady in the Lake similarly, and they really throw you off by not having any scenes at the lake, where in the novel that's where all the action gets tied together for who did what to whom.
Yeah, you really have to listen to the dialogue to be able to figure out like what's happening in this movie.
Yeah, so at this point the movie opens with Philip Marlowe has decided he's getting out of the detective business because it's not lucrative enough, which he was always nickel and diming himself, in the novels. He was the knight in shining armor who couldn't pay to get his shoes repaired, sort of thing. But he decides he's going to write short stories, and he's going to submit into a Black Mask-like publication, which Raymond Chandler himself came out of doing. He wasn't a detective. Dashiell Hammett was actually the guy who started as an actual Pinkerton detective and became a writer. Chandler had been like an accountant, and he married one of his friend's moms. So he was married to this very attractive but much older woman who he kind of had to keep in high style, and eventually was like, well, I'm going to try writing stories at like half a penny a word, because this is like Depression era, and then was able to turn that into a lucrative writing career, and he gave up being an accountant or actuary or whatever he was. And if you see him, he looks like an actuary. Like he's a cartoonish little man with a mustache. Like you can't believe this is the guy. I mean, it's such
a visor on.
Yeah, and you can totally see him doing that. I mean, he's what's the oh God, Ben Stiller just made the. I almost said a prayer for Owen Meany, and that's not it. I'll insert it later.
Walter Mitty?
Yeah, it's a total Walter Mitty sort of thing of like, oh, I can, inside his head, this is the world he sees in Los Angeles. So anyway. Okay, I'm fixing this because a lot of what I said was wrong and just kind of lazy. Raymond Chandler was actually an executive for an oil company who was more or less let go because of just a bunch of, we'll call it a pile of vices and bad behaviors. He was sort of an accountant, but he'd made his way up in the world before turning to writing. He did marry the stepmother of one of his friends, but she was not demanding to be kept in style. The push for money was a question of survival when he lost his job in the Great Depression. He did have some earlier publishing going on in his life, but it had been a while. But once he didn't have a job, he really turned hard into it and started writing for the pulps at that point, and then eventually started turning his short stories into novels. Probably the weirdest one is he doesn't have a mustache. I am not sure why I visualize him with one, but he was clean shaven. We won't get into Chandler's drinking here, probably should at some point in the future, especially if we cover some other Chandler adaptations. Anyway, Raymond Chandler is not hard to research, but it's been a while, and I should have done my reading again before we started recording, so my apologies. That's not really the plot of the movie, but the plot of the movie is he's told to come down to this magazine and talk to them about negotiating for his story. But it turns out the editor of the magazine is Audrey Totter playing Adrienne Fromset.
Well, she's the assistant editor, isn't she?
No, she's the editor.
Oh, she's not the owner of the...
No.
Okay.
The owner is our hapless Mr. Kingsby.
Okay.
And Mr. Kingsby's wife has disappeared,
yes.
And Audrey Totter wants Marlowe to track down the wife because she thinks she's in Mexico getting a divorce, and if that's true, then she can move in on Kingsby and marry into the Kingsby millions. She has designs
on him.
Yeah.
She brought Marlowe in with ulterior motives.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which he, of course, unpacks because she doesn't sell it that way. She sells it as, just track down his wife in Mexico or wherever she's actually
She's
at.
very obvious about it. Mm-hmm. A little too obvious, maybe.
Yes. So, and then it gets real twisty, as all Chandler stories do from there. He's the guy that supposedly the wife ran off with is actually in town in a suburb, and Marlowe tracks him down. And
was it Bay City?
Bay City? Yeah, I think I can't remember. He used Bay City a lot, but it was supposed to stand in for somewhere else, which was just a suburb of LA.
Sure.
And he gets knocked out by that guy, gets handed over to the cops who find him. That happens, by the way, to Marlowe all the time. Marlowe is not a fighter. Marlowe is a guy who gets knocked out all the time. Every novel, at some point, he's just taken out.
And you get to see it because you are Marlowe, so you get punched in the face.
Yeah, with brass knuckles. So anyway, from there, then that guy eventually turns up dead. Who killed that guy? And
there's a woman skulking around his house.
There's his supposed landlord skulking around the house.
Landlord, put that in quotes. Mm-hmm. Which, I mean, she seems fishy from the get-go. Just the way she's played. And I know this is probably intentional, but I don't know. It's not much of a surprise that there's something going on with her.
Yeah. And he starts building a very quick but odd relationship with Adrienne Fromset, and she's clearly into Marlowe too, but he's not a millionaire, so
don't go falling in love with me.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't think, in a lot of ways, I don't know if this movie is actually good. I want to say that up front. I don't know either, but it's interesting. Yeah. I literally watch this every Christmas now and have for years, usually by myself after you go to bed. And it's just such an odd movie, and the story is so windy and weird that it's a great way to spend like 90 minutes for me.
Yeah. The most confusing part to me that I think I would probably grasp on the second go around is the fake landlord who, spoilers, ends up. Can we spoil this?
Sure.
She's the one that done it.
Yeah.
She has like 4 different names throughout this whole movie, so that's a little confusing.
Right. It is very confusing. Including, they say in the credits, there's because people would have known the novel, they say who they've cast as Crystal Kingsby.
Right.
And it's, I think, Latin for "she is dead."
Yeah, I did. I did read that. Yeah, that's kind of brilliant.
Which, I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool, because I this is the first time watching the credits I noticed they actually had given Crystal Kingsby a credit, but they kind of had to in order to make you think the character was going to show up at some point. Right. So it's stuff like that I love about this movie, and it does start as a Christmas movie, which is it's talking about the credits at the beginning.
Yeah, it's all jingly, and all the credits have like Christmas horses and stuff on them.
Right, it looks very much like the beginning of "It's a Wonderful Life."
I think it was like Jingle Bells is playing or something to that effect.
And then the last card is pulled away because it looks like a series of Christmas cards, and then the last one's pulled away, and there's a little pistol, and you're like, then it's like dun dun dun. Which is just like, oh, yeah.
And then Christmas really isn't featured throughout the rest of it. I mean, yes, they mention it because it takes place during Christmas. The only time I noticed that there may be an advantage to setting it then is he is able to move around the police department because the cops are all kind of checked out.
Yeah.
One of them's laying on the table on the phone.
Oh, that's actually a journalist.
Oh, it is a journalist.
Yeah, he was in the press room.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So he's able to use the phone in there, but I didn't know if he was trying to be sneaky or something.
Yeah. He was actually calling one of the papers to get some information at that point.
Okay.
But, I do like the scene on Christmas Eve after Audrey Totter picks him up and she brings him back, and they, he's been totally jacked up at this point, and she's got him at her apartment, and then you see like Christmas Day or Christmas late Christmas Eve, and then you see some stuff on Christmas Day. That in some weird way, more than almost any other movie, actually feels to me like how Christmas Eve actually feels. It's like really quiet, and it's just kind of two people like listening to the radio. Yeah. And kind of talking back and forth.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not like Jingle All the Way of like, it's all totally insane and oh my god, the shopping malls and it's like once you actually get to Christmas Eve, stuff gets pretty, at least at our house, really chill.
Yes, very chill.
And it's like really quiet, and everyone's just kind of sitting around listening to Christmas music and kind of
usually
just talking.
maybe watching a bad movie if it's late enough. Yeah.
And then Christmas Day is really quiet.
It is too. And the scene that really struck me that I really enjoyed, the little bit, was she said, "Oh, are you enjoying your Christmas present?" She had given him a robe, and he sticks his hand in the pocket, but the card says she had bought it for her boss.
Yeah.
And then she comes in and she tells him flat out, straightforward, I bought this for him, because she's trying to let him know that she is being truthful with him. I really like that bit. She's like, I know the card. I left the card in there so that you would know I'm telling the truth.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's no way she just happened to have a silk robe ready to go for Marlowe for Christmas.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's.
She's like, I'm not trying to pull one over on you. This is for him, but
she goes through a real character arc.
She does
over the course of the movie.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about Audrey Totter.
Yes.
I'm gonna try and release this on her birthday, which is December 20th.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's neat.
I can't remember how old she would have been now. I think she would have been about 100 right now, 101, something like that. She lived to a ripe old age.
You have a signed autograph from her.
I do. So I was introduced to Audrey Totter's work by my friend Jennifer, who lives in San Francisco. And I'd never seen her until she showed me Tension. And if you've never seen Tension, it's amazing. It's got Richard Basehart. And it's Sid Charisse in a non-dancing role, which is just absolutely mind-boggling.
Why would you do that?
But she's good, but it's just like, you have Sid Charisse. It's make her dance.
Just throw in a high kick.
Right. But Audrey Totter was sometimes cast as a very sweet person. If you've ever seen The Cockeyed Miracle, which I don't actually recommend, where she, because she could definitely play the good girl. She was probably competing for roles with Gloria Graham.
You know what? I used to get them confused all the time.
And I love Gloria Graham. I do.
Mm-hmm.
But Audrey Totter is, to me, the scrappy underdog.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Gloria Graham had whatever Gloria Graham had that just translated very well to screen. Audrey Totter has her own thing that I adore. And and it's like, in The Unsuspected, she's absolutely phenomenal. As long as you cast her as the bad girl, she's dynamite on screen. Tension, it's just one for the books. And she's just an actor that not many people dug into. So she ended up doing some other like westerns. She did The Woman They Almost Lynched, which is campy and weird and super fun. And
when did she stop acting? Like, how late was she?
I think the last thing she did, like a lot of people from her generation, was A Murder, She Wrote.
Yes, you're correct. There are a lot of credits there.
But she was on a TV series called Cimarron, and then she was still acting steadily. She did a lot of TV work then, and so it's probably out there somewhere, but you'd have to buy a DVD set that came out in like 2002 or something. And then she was on. She was a like head nurse on some medical show.
Okay.
That I can't remember the name of right now, and I don't think you can find.
St. Elsewhere.
Way earlier than that. It was. I want to say it was like a '60s, early '70s.
Oh wow!
TV show.
I would not know.
But yeah, she was absolutely fantastic, and you can just tell, just whip smart. Her screen. I don't know if it was her screen debut, but her kind of breakthrough thing was. Oh crap. Not Double Indemnity. The Postman Always Rings Twice. Mm-hmm. Where she plays the girl that John Garfield is thinking he might like over Lana Turner, and she's only in it for like 20 seconds. She's in it very, very briefly, but in a really key role, because it's the thing that creates a rift between Lana Turner and John Garfield. And that was kind of her breakout thing. And she was, I mean, especially in this
her early 20s when she started acting?
Oh, God, she was a kid, yeah. I want to say she was like 20 when she was in Postman Always Rings Twice. Okay. And by this point, she was in her, mid to late 20s, I want to say, because Postman Rings Twice was pretty early.
In this movie, she was...
Yeah, she was still in her 20s.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But... Yeah, I disagreed with some of the stuff the guys were saying on the disc when I was listening to the commentary track, but I don't know. I mean, it's an MGM movie. MGM didn't really do a ton of noir. It wasn't really their thing. It was more like RKO and some of the other studios. Warner Brothers had done gangster movies and things like that, so they were doing some. And of course, it was a cheap thing for non-main studios to do.
It seemed very cheap. In fact, I think they came in like days early on shooting.
Well, yeah, we can definitely talk about what the impact was of shooting first person and having those long takes. But yeah, so they were saying like, oh, they just wanted Lana Turner, and they cast Totter, and so they tried to make her look like Lana Turner, and I was just like, I don't think so. I think Montgomery knew who he was getting. Like, yeah. I can't imagine Lana Turner in this role. Like, I like Lana Turner, but I think he knew what he was getting with Audrey Totter in this part, and she nails it. We did say some of this stuff comes off as kind of camp. I mean, she's asked to do some really, really difficult things. Okay, so Adrienne Fromset in the novel is on about 2 pages.
Really?
She's like a secretary for Kingsby who he kind of has a rough run-in with when he's going to go meet with Kingsby or something.
Okay, so Kingsby is the one that hires him in the novel.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
and he does in the movie later on, but he's not the initial.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's just kind of the mean lady at the front desk who's attractive.
Okay.
That's basically it. And I think Chandler was the one in his initial screenplay who said, okay, we have to have a point of view character to actually look at. And he doesn't really have, this is one of the few Chandler novels where there's not really a femme fatale, because the characters are kind of off screen almost in the novel.
Yeah.
Him trying to figure out
Well,
who's
it feels
doing
like
what.
they're setting her up as that in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I mean, even though when I was watching, I was like, there's no way. I mean, this has to be a red herring. And it absolutely was.
Yeah. I mean, certainly by the
She's acting like
of,
it was. I mean, she's acting like there's something suspicious going on with her, and she's just has her sights set on her boss.
I do think there was the suggestion that Frances was sleeping with Chris Lavery.
Yeah, there was in
the movie and the novel.
Yeah, there was some mention of some connection between the two of them.
And it was definitely in the novel that she was, which is why I think he was like, okay, let's beef up this part and make her more important, because it does give you the red herring. Like maybe she, because Chandler would definitely have Marlowe fall for women he knew could be the murderer. Like
right.
and I think that happened more than once. So anyway, it's she's really good in it. I do think she's asked to do some really tough stuff. She is the focal character, but then you can tell, one of the things they did say on the commentary track, I agreed with it, like, it's 4 a.m. and that's how she shows up at the door. You can tell this is an MGM movie. Like, no one looks like they just stepped out of a salon at 4 a.m.
No, you don't sleep like that.
They didn't even try and get her to like look sleepy. Like, she's just like, hello. And it is a noir, for sure. It's a lot of noir was based on novels that were written a little bit earlier than the actual film noir movement, which you can kind of say starts in about 46 and goes to about 55 or so. Some of the stuff that gets adapted from James Cain novels, things like that, was actually written in the 30s. So there's this kind of weird thing when you're talking about what made for noir. But the lighting in this is also very MGM. Sometimes it's noirish in the background, but they always have the actors fully lit.
Yes.
You don't ever have like partially lit characters. You don't have just the like mini blind light across the eyes. You don't have any of that kind of stuff.
Or maybe that's because he was concentrating on the POV thing. I mean,
I think so. I think they were trying to make sure characters popped. So it's stylistically, it's kind of hard to make noir in the way some of you were like to say Siad Mack or one of those other directors. Fritz Lang certainly would have done until later Fritz Lang.
It's something that just occurred to me, and maybe it's just a crutch of having to use this point of view, is there are very rarely more than one character in a scene. I guess there are a couple when he's with the cops where there are multiple people.
And the secretary is not really a character.
No, she's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's someone to make Audrey Totter feel uncomfortable about herself. And there's, and then there's the Christmas party sequence.
That is true. Yeah. Which they very quickly have to, let's step aside and go into this room and talk, because he's not going to talk in front of a room full of people.
Yeah, and the shot is interesting when he walks into the Christmas party, because they do have everyone like stop and turn and look directly at the lens.
It's like a record scratch.
Yeah. When you're not exactly sure why that was the decision for that scene, other than they thought it looked kind of cool.
That was a little awkward. Yeah. It was.
But, I like... we talked a lot about Audrey Totter, and I'm always happy to talk at length about Audrey Totter, but...
I did read that... I wonder what the original ending for this was going to be, because both she and Montgomery did not like the happy ending that was tacked on there. So I'm wondering if that was like a reshoot. I think MGM...
They wanted them to end up together?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean...
How did it end in the book? Because you said she was only in it
Yeah,
little
he
bit.
he wraps up the case.
She was not really a love interest at all.
No.
Okay.
She disappears. Yeah, halfway through the book.
Okay.
And honestly, because I'd seen the movie before I read the book, I kept expecting her to pop up. It was interesting reading the book after seeing the movie because I couldn't, because it's so windy, I couldn't remember a lot of what had happened other than kind of like, oh yeah, there's this scene and that scene. Mm-hmm. There's a whole thing of why the woman had run off, Mildred had run off.
Sure.
That they kind of hint at in the movie. There's even a scene where he goes and sees the people who are the victims of what had occurred, but they kind of blow right past. And in the book, that's a major part of him figuring out what actually happened, which feels like this weird detour in the book of like, why are we worried about this family that like lost somebody?
Well, I think that's part of what hurts the movie is the scene that they cut out for him just, talking at you for 2 minutes to catch you up.
Well, and so there's really two big things. There's the stuff at the lake, and there's the stuff with this family that's all afraid of the Bay City cops. Mm-hmm. And I think
he did go to their house
and
talks to them briefly, but they shut him down.
But yeah, I mean, I think the cops in this are pretty good. I like the fact that it's still a Hayes era movie, but they managed to make sure there is actually a shady cop, which you see some in movies from this era, but this guy's, been basically stalking this woman.
I thought he was pretty good.
Yeah. It's funny because in the commentary track, they said they thought he wasn't very good. They said they thought he was struggling with the fact that the camera was the one. Yeah.
I don't think it's easy for anyone to do that, but...
Yeah. I was like, I thought he did just fine.
Yeah, I thought he did okay.
And I do like the fact that there's the little sequence where the police chief has to keep talking to his family on Christmas Eve.
He's telling his children that, is it the night before Christmas?
Yeah.
He keeps reciting. Yeah. And then he keeps telling Marla, go home!
But at the same time, it's a weird way to eat up time in a movie versus actually having those other scenes.
Yes. Yeah.
So it does make for some challenging viewing, partially because you also are being told as Marlowe, please leave.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, it's a full-length movie, too. Mm-hmm. They didn't, cut back on anything. Mm-hmm. It's an hour and 45 minutes, so...
Yeah. So one of the things I think is another weakness of the movie is Marlowe verbally in the books and all that. We think of, the wisecracking PI who's, really gallows humor, morbid, whatever. That's clearly in the books his coping mechanism. And in the movie, that's all you get. You don't, while it's first person, you don't get his internal monologue. You don't get that voiceover.
None of it, no.
And I think in some ways that's something that if you were to adapt Marlowe now, I would say was kind of necessary. Because, especially in this age of anti-heroes, because Marlowe's not an anti-hero. He's a hero who doesn't necessarily look like, Errol Flynn and doesn't act like Errol Flynn, but he's his own kind of, he's a force for good in the seedy underbelly of LA.
Yeah.
And
I'm glad you said that because in a way it does make him seem not as sympathetic.
Right.
Yeah.
He's constantly being mean to
even though
Audrey
you
Totter.
are seeing this literally through his eyes, there's not that connection there. You feel a little bit disconnected with him, and that's really strange.
Yeah, it feels like he's always trying to one-up everybody instead of
he seems
trying
like
to keep...
jerk.
Yeah, instead of just I'm keeping people off balance as I'm figuring out what's going on with them. Which, it's a fine tactic, whatever, for any, detective, whatever. I don't... But I do think, if anyone decides they want to adapt Marlowe again, don't do the first-person thing. Unless you're making a Marlowe video game. But I think that voiceover then becomes kind of important. Mm-hmm. Or finding some way to have that happen without giving him a sidekick to talk to. Which is generally what people do, right? I've got to have someone for this person to talk to.
For some reason, the Disney animals popped into my head.
I mean, Batman and Robin, right?
That's true.
You got to give him a Robin to talk to, or else he's just a guy standing there
crazy.
Dressed like a bat.
Yeah. Talking to himself.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, The only time I thought the first person point of view was effective in a different way was when he's creeping around that guy's house.
Yeah, Lavery's house.
It's a little, that part is very it's very tense. And you feel along with him, like, what's going to pop around at the corner? It's not something popping around at the person you're looking at, it's popping out at you. And it ends up not, being that. But it's effective.
Yeah.
Then.
Yeah, well, they do, yeah. I mean, it's and I think you could have done maybe that scene that way. Just that, of like, we're going to actually try and do it this way, so you're discovering this thing along with Marlowe.
Yeah.
But that's not what they did. They did it for the whole
They did the whole thing.
Yeah. Now, you do get a feel for, we talk a lot about, like, the male gaze, right? That's a thing that has somehow made it from film school discussions into popular culture now. And this movie, if you ever want to know, like, what they're actually, like, if you want to see, like, the most obvious, like, he's, like, watching the secretary's butt as she's walking out of the room.
Yeah, both times, like, she leaves the room very obviously, I think at least 2 times in this movie, and the camera just follows her the entire time. I mean, the first time Audrey Totter calls him out on it, but I mean, yeah.
And I mean, it's interesting from that perspective, because they were obviously fully aware of what they were doing. And you also can see Audrey Totter from that perspective, which is not as in the same way, right? It's focused on her eyes and her face, because you can't not be focused on Audrey Totter's gigantic eyes. But yeah, it's an interesting little twist, I think, on how you can view the movie, or an extra little bonus thing to consider while watching it. But I think it's a little bit of a mess at the end. I do love the actress's, like, hysterical performance in that last bit. Like,
oh yeah,
it's so, like, this woman is a maniac. Because she doesn't get a whole lot of scenes. She's got the scene earlier where you meet her in the house,
right?
And at the end, where she kind of comes clean about what's going on, and Marlowe kind of does the prestige detective reveal of,
she's pointing her gun at him.
Yeah, I knew that the dead woman in the lake, spoiler, was Crystal Kingsley all along, and, I've known this for a while, sort of thing. Which, in the book, because I'd forgotten that was how it ended, because it's so... But it's such a big moment when you find that out in the book. Because that's how Chandler would do his reveals. Despite you have this inner monologue, he doesn't actually drop it until usually, there's this...
Well, suspense.
Yeah.
You gotta keep him through the end of the book.
And I remember when I was listening to the book, I did it as an audiobook, I was just like, damn, that was smart. That was so good.
I did find it hilarious that I think it happens 3 times in this movie where he's set up as a drunk driver. Or is it just twice? It felt like 3 times. It's
twice, but it could have been...
One time you're actually with him. I think that is what makes it feel like it happens a lot. But yeah, they just basically pour booze on him after he wrecks his car. Oh, the first time he gets knocked out, and I guess
Lavery pours.
He drives him to, like, crashes his car with him, and, like, it's elaborate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the second time he's being followed by the other cop.
Right.
So it's I think it's because it's 2 entirely separate people that do this to him.
Yeah, I don't remember if that happens twice in the book or not. I don't honestly remember. I'd have to reread it, but yeah, it's a little obvious once it happens the second time. But hey, if it worked the first time, let's do it again.
Right. If it's not broke, don't fix it.
But that's all I really want to say about the movie. If you get a chance to watch it, it's super strange. Stick with it.
Yeah, I did get used to it again, like I said, after about 20-30 minutes.
And if I get a chance to promote Audrey Totter, I'm going to do it. But I think she's great in it. I think everyone in it is good. She's
got a lot to do in this. I mean, she's carrying this movie essentially.
Yeah. So, put it on when you've got one of the, like, let's watch something a little different.
By a roaring fire?
Yeah.
It's very Christmassy. It's not very Christmassy, but...
Yeah, it's got its moments. But, it's a fun mystery movie, and I'm hoping to do a little more noir next year, so it seems like a good way to dive into all of that. So, anyway, Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays.
Striking an officer, resisting arrest, and murder, all on Christmas Eve. Let's wrap you up real pretty, shall we? And take you right down to headquarters.
That about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed this podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. You can drop comments on this podcast and let us know what you think. We do have a Signal Watch Patreon, and if you're so moved, we'd most certainly appreciate your support. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies. You've got to be kind.